My fiancé dumped me months before our wedding because his mom said I wasn't good enough. You're nothing without my son. He can do so much better, she hissed. I just laughed and left. Now she calls me 10 times a day, sobbing and begging me to take back her broke, miserable son. I still can't believe I'm typing this up 3 months ago. I was planning what should have been the happiest day of my life with Brett, my partner of 3 years. Today I'm living in my best friend's spare bedroom, scrolling through apartment listings and trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Brett and I met in 2021. Within 6 months we were inseparable, and after a year and a half we moved in together. When Brett first introduced me to his parents, his dad Walt seemed pleasant enough, if a bit quiet. Susan, on the other hand, spent the entire dinner quizzing me about my background and family connections with this weird tight smile that never reached her eyes. I remember mentioning that my dad worked in construction and my mom was a school aide, and watching Susan's expression sour slightly before she quickly masked it. Brett brushed it off later, saying she was just protective and old-fashioned. His exact words were that she came from a family that valued certain connections, but that he didn't care about that stuff. I believed him, because, well, love makes you stupid sometimes. When Brett proposed last year, I was over the moon. He did it during a weekend trip to this cute little B&B upstate. We agreed on a medium-sized wedding, nothing extravagant, since we were both saving for a house down payment. The problem started almost immediately after we announced our engagement. Susan insisted on being involved in every single detail. At first it seemed helpful. She had connections with vendors and offered to help coordinate since I work long hours, but it quickly became obvious she was taking over. The venue I loved was too shabby. The catering I wanted was not the kind of food served at their family events. The dress I fell in love with was a bit cheap looking, don't you think? Brett kept saying it was easier to just go along with her suggestions than fight her on everything. I reluctantly agreed to compromise on some things to keep the peace, but it felt like death by 1,000 cuts. Every decision that was taken away from me chipped at my excitement, until wedding planning felt more like a chore than a celebration. The real turning point came during a dinner at their house. About months before the wedding, Susan had invited her friends Rita and Angela over, and I realized halfway through that I was basically being paraded in front of them for approval. They kept exchanging these little glances whenever I spoke. At one point Rita asked where I summered as a child, and I laughed, thinking she was joking when I explained that my family's idea of vacation was camping at the state park or visiting my grandma in Ohio. The table went silent after dinner. Susan cornered me in the kitchen while I was helping clean up. She started with what seemed like casual conversation about Brett's ex-girlfriend Melissa, who apparently came from some influential family with a vacation home in the Hamptons. Then she mentioned how Brett had always been destined for great things, and how she hoped I wouldn't hold him back. I remember feeling like I'd been slapped when I asked her what exactly she meant by that. She dropped all pretense. She told me that while I seemed nice enough, I clearly wasn't from the right sort of background to help Brett's future. That my lack of refinement would eventually embarrass him in important circles, that I wouldn't know how to entertain properly or make the right connections. I was so shocked I couldn't even respond at first. When I finally found my voice and told her she was being incredibly rude, she just laughed this condescending little laugh and said something about how my defensiveness proved her point. She said Brett deserved someone who could match his potential, not drag him down. I walked out of the kitchen and immediately told Brett we needed to leave. In the car I was shaking as I told him everything his mother had said. I expected outrage, anger on my behalf, something. Instead he got quiet and said she didn't mean it like that, and that she was just worried about our future. He asked if maybe I had misunderstood her tone. That night was our first major fight. I couldn't believe he was defending her behavior. He eventually admitted that his mother had been expressing concerns about our compatibility for months. Apparently she'd been filling his head with doubts about whether I would fit in with the future. He imagined the worst part: he was actually listening to her. Over the next 2 weeks things deteriorated rapidly. Brett became distant and started staying late at work. When he was home he'd bring up random concerns about our relationship that never existed before, like whether our different backgrounds would cause problems with raising kids, or if I'd be comfortable at his company events at all. came to a head when Susan invited us over for another dinner, supposedly to clear the air. Brett practically begged me to go, saying she wanted to apologize. Like an idiot, I believed him and went. There was no apology. Instead, Susan spent the entire evening making backhanded comments about my clothes, my table manners, even the way I spoke. When Brett stepped outside to take a phone call, she leaned across the table and said with this chilling certainty that I was nothing without her son, that he could do so much better than me, and that I should walk away before I ruined his life with my ordinariness. When I started crying, she actually rolled her eyes and said my emotional behavior just proved her point about my lack of composure. When Brett returned, I was gathering my things to leave. When he asked what happened, Susan put on this concerned face and said I had overreacted to some gentle advice about wedding planning. I was done in the car. I told Brett exactly what happened and said he needed to choose. Either we cut contact with his mother until she could respect me, or the wedding was off. I expected him to finally stand up for me. He didn't. Instead, he said maybe his mother was right, maybe we were rushing into things, maybe we did come from two different worlds to make it work. The man I loved, who had sworn he didn't care about status or background, was suddenly pairing his mother's classes. Nonsense. I took off my engagement ring and placed it on the dashboard. I told him to drop me at Angela's place instead of our apartment. He didn't even try to stop me. When I got out of the car the next day while Brett was at work, I packed most of my things from our apartment. I left my key and a note saying I would arrange to get the rest of my stuff later. I blocked his mother's number immediately, though I kept Brett unblocked in case he came to his senses. He texted a few days later with a pathetic message about how he was confused and needed time to think. I replied that there was nothing to think about. Either he was willing to build a life with me based on love and respect, or he wasn't. His response that maybe we should take a break until after his big work project was finished, then reassess. That was my answer. 3 years together and he couldn't even properly break up with me, just wanted to keep me hanging on while he reassessed. I told him not to contact me again. According to mutual friends, Brett has been telling people we mutually decided to call off the wedding due to different life goals. Meanwhile, I've thrown myself into rebuilding my life. Yesterday I got a voicemail from Susan. I don't know how she got my new number, but she was sniffling and asking if we could talk about Brett. I didn't listen to the whole thing before deleting it. Whatever drama is happening in their perfect little world isn't my problem anymore. I know this was long, but I needed to get it off my chest. The wedding would have been next weekend. Instead, I'm taking myself on a solo trip to a beach rental I found on Airbnb. Not the honeymoon I imagined, but maybe exactly the fresh start I need. First update. First of all, thank you so much for all the support on my original post. The first month after the breakup was honestly a blur. I stayed on Angela's pull-out couch longer than I planned to. She's literally a saint. Every morning I'd wake up disoriented, reaching for Brett. Before remembering everything that happened, my appetite disappeared and I lost 10 pounds without trying. Angela started leaving protein bars on the coffee table because I'd forget to eat. I spent a lot of time just staring at apartment listings without actually calling anyone. Something about making that move felt so final. Angela never pressured me, but after about 3 weeks she gently suggested we go look at a place that had just opened up in her friend's building. The apartment was nothing special, just a small one-bedroom with a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, but it was within my budget and only a 15-minute drive from work. I signed the lease the same day. Moving in was another hurdle. I'd left most of my furniture behind at Brett's place because I couldn't deal with arranging movers while feeling like an emotional wreck. Angela and her boyfriend helped me pick up the essentials from IKEA: a bed, a small couch, a dining table that doubles as my desk. The apartment stayed pretty sparse for weeks. I just couldn't muster the energy to make it feel like home. Work became my lifeline. I'd arrive early, leave late, and volunteer for extra projects just to avoid sitting alone in my empty apartment. My team lead noticed and started giving me more responsibilities, just coordinating with other departments, training the new hire, that kind of thing. But it felt good to be needed, to be valued. About 2 months after the breakup, I ran into Nick, Brett's brother, at the grocery store. I almost hid behind the cereal display when I saw him, but he spotted me first. I was surprised when He actually approached me looking genuinely uncomfortable. He told me he was sorry about what happened and that he'd argued with his mom about how she treated me. It was awkward but weirdly validating to hear someone from Brett's family acknowledge that I'd been wrong. That's when I first heard that things weren't going great for Brett. I thanked him for the apology but kept the conversation brief. I wasn't ready to be pulled back into that world even peripherally. A week later, my old college roommate invited me to a party. I almost didn't go, but Angela practically pushed me out the door, insisting that I needed to remember how to be a person again. She was right, though I'd never admit it to her face. The party was where I met Matt. He was the roommate's cousin visiting from out of town. We just ended up in the same conversation circle talking about random things. He asked for my number at the end of the night, and I surprised myself by giving it to him. Our first date was coffee on a Sunday afternoon. Low pressure, casual. He was easy to talk to, and for the first time in months I went hours without thinking about Brett. Matt works in something completely different from Brett's field, lives in a modest apartment similar to mine, and has a refreshingly normal family that doesn't seem to care about summer homes or making the right connections. When I told him about my breakup, the condensed version, he just listened without trying to fix anything or offer platitudes. Around month 3 post-breakup, an unexpected opportunity came up at work. My company was restructuring, creating a new team, and they needed someone to take on more responsibility. My extra efforts over the previous months had apparently not gone unnoticed. My manager encouraged me to apply, though she warned me the position would involve longer hours and more stress. I almost didn't go for it. My confidence was still shaky, but I figured I had nothing to lose. The interview process was grueling. 3 rounds with various department heads, a presentation I stayed up until 2 a.m. perfecting, and a final meeting with upper management. I honestly didn't think I'd get it. There were other candidates with more experience, but 2 weeks later my manager called me into her office to offer me the position. The promotion came with a significant raise that meant I could finally stop stressing about making rent each month. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was enough to start rebuilding my emergency fund, which had been depleted during the post-breakup chaos. I was still processing this news when I bumped into Rita, Susan's gossipy friend, at the mall. I was shopping for professional clothes for my new role, and she spotted me coming out of a store. She acted overly friendly, as if we'd been close before. After some awkward small talk, she dropped what felt like carefully planned information. Brett had lost his job. Apparently the big project he'd been working on, the one he'd used as an excuse when asking for a break from our relationship, had fallen apart spectacularly. Something about missed deadlines and poor management. Rita seemed to be watching my reaction closely, so I kept my face neutral while she continued sharing details. Brett had been let go, and according to Rita, he'd been struggling to find his footing ever since. She also mentioned with poorly disguised glee that Melissa had briefly rekindled things with Brett after our breakup, only to end it again after just a few weeks. Rita suggested that perhaps I dodged a bullet and winked at me. Later that week I had another strange encounter. I was having dinner with Matt at this new restaurant downtown when I spotted Susan across the room. She was with Walt and another couple I didn't recognize. Our eyes met briefly, and I quickly looked away, my heart suddenly racing. I expected her to ignore me, or maybe give me one of her famous cold stares. Instead, she actually approached our table while Walt looked on with an expression of mild horror. She greeted me like we were old friends, commenting on how wonderful I looked. She asked about my new job, how did she even know about that, and complimented my outfit. Matt looked confused but polite as I awkwardly introduced him. Susan's smile tightened almost imperceptibly when she realized I was on a date, but she maintained her friendly facade. Before leaving, she mentioned that everyone misses me and that she hoped we could catch up properly someday. I managed a non-committal response, and she finally returned to her table. Matt took it in stride when I explained who she was, though he did comment that she seemed intense. The weirdness continued. About a week later, Angela forwarded me a Facebook message she received from Brett asking how I was doing and if I was seeing anyone. She hadn't responded, knowing I wouldn't want her to share details of my life with him. I was grateful for her loyalty but unsettled by his sudden interest. Through mutual friends, I learned more about Brett's situation. After losing his job, he'd apparently moved back in with his parents while job Hunting the perfect life Susan had envisioned for him was crumbling, and from what I heard she was not handling it well. I tried not to think about them too much. My relationship with Matt was progressing naturally, no rush, just genuine connection. We'd been seeing each other for about 2 months, taking things slow. He came over to my apartment regularly, helping me slowly make the space feel more like home. We installed shelves for my books one weekend and hung some artwork the next, small touches that made the place feel less temporary. My new position at work was challenging but fulfilling. Some days I'd come home completely drained, questioning if I was up to the task, but overall I was proud of myself for taking the leap. My team respected me, and I was finally starting to believe I deserved the opportunity. Then last Friday everything shifted again. I was leaving work when my phone buzzed with a notification, a voicemail from an unknown number. I almost deleted it without listening, probably just another spam call about my car's extended warranty, but something made me play it. It was Susan, her voice thick with what sounded like tears. She said she'd been trying to reach me, that she needed to talk to me about Brett, that he wasn't doing well, that she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd do anything to fix things between us. 6 months ago this woman told me I was nothing without her son. Now she was practically begging for my help. I didn't call her back. Instead I went to Matt's place as we'd planned. But the voicemail kept playing in my head throughout the evening. Matt noticed something was off and asked what was wrong. When I told him, he didn't tell me what to do or offer solutions. He just asked what I wanted, what would give me peace. I woke up this morning to 3 more missed calls from Susan and a text from a number I didn't recognize but assumed was Brett's new phone. I haven't opened it yet. I guess my question now is, do I engage at all? Last update. So it's been about a month since my last update, and I need to vent because things have gotten weird, like uncomfortably weird. When I ended my last post I mentioned that Susan had left me a tearful voicemail, and I wasn't sure whether to respond. After debating for 3 days about whether to return Susan's call, I finally decided to text Brett's number, the unknown one that had texted me with a simple message asking what was going on. I figured a text was safer than a call, easier to ignore if things got uncomfortable. Within 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes, my phone rang. It was Susan, not Brett. Apparently she's been using his phone to contact me since I had blocked her number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. That was my first mistake. The Susan on the phone was nothing like the cold, judgmental woman I remembered. Her voice was shaky, almost desperate. She started by asking how I was doing, commented on how well I looked when she saw me at the restaurant, which was still creepy, and then launched into what I can only describe as the most uncomfortable apology I've ever received. She admitted that she'd been terrible to me, that she'd misjudged me based on superficial factors, and that she regretted driving me away. I sat there in stunned silence as she continued, explaining that Brett had been lost since our breakup, that he spiraled after losing his job, that he was drinking too much, that he'd made some bad financial decisions. When I finally managed to ask why she was telling me all this, her answer made my skin crawl. She thought I could help him recover because I was such a stabilizing influence. She actually said that Brett needs someone responsible like me right now. The audacity of this woman to go from telling me I wasn't good enough to deciding I was exactly what her son needed when things got tough. I told her as calmly as I could that I was sorry Brett was struggling, but that we'd been over for months. I mentioned that I was seeing someone else. Now her response, a dismissive comment about how these rebound relationships rarely last and how Brett and I had real history. Then she asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss situation further. Against my better judgment and Matt's concerned look when I told him about it, I agreed to meet Susan at a coffee shop the following weekend. I told myself it would give me closure. Maybe I also wanted to see for myself how desperate things had gotten for her to come crawling back to the girl she once considered beneath her son. When I arrived at the coffee shop, Susan was already there, looking noticeably different from the polished, superior woman I remembered. Her normally perfect hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, her makeup was minimal, and she looked tired. She'd ordered me my favorite drink, a detail that was both thoughtful and unsettling because it Met Brett had told her what I liked. The next hour was surreal. Susan laid out Brett's downfall in excruciating detail. After losing his job, he tried to maintain his lifestyle while job hunting, quickly depleting his savings. He'd made a bad investment in some friend's startup that went nowhere. He'd maxed out 2 credit cards, and now he was living in his old bedroom at their house, sleeping until noon and barely applying for jobs. Throughout her monologue, I kept waiting for her to ask me directly to take Brett back. Instead, she did something more manipulative. She kept saying things like he was at his best when he was with you, and you were always so good at motivating him, and he listens to you in a way he never listens to me. When I reminded her that she once thought I wasn't good enough for her son, she actually teared up and said that she'd been protecting her son from the wrong things, and that she should have valued my steadiness more than Melissa's connections. I almost laughed at how transparent she was being. I was suddenly steady rather than boring, responsible rather than lacking ambition. I left that meeting feeling odd, hollow. I'd expected satisfaction seeing Susan brought low, but mostly I felt pity mixed with lingering anger. I told her I'd think about talking to Brett, but made no promises. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The call started the very next day. Susan called to follow up on our coffee meeting. Then she called again to tell me Brett had asked about me. Then she called to mention a job opening she thought Brett might be qualified for, wondering if my company was hiring. Every single day I started letting the calls go to voicemail. The messages got increasingly desperate. She mentioned that Brett's father was threatening to cut him off financially if he didn't get his act together soon. She talked about how their family friends were asking uncomfortable questions about Brett's situation. She even brought up my parents once, saying she'd love to make amends with them too. Nick, Brett's brother, texted me one evening to apologize for his mother's behavior. He explained that Brett's spiral had been worse than the family had on. Apparently Brett had started drinking heavily after our breakup, which contributed to his poor performance at work. Nick mentioned that Susan was partly blaming herself for pushing me away, seeing it as the start of Brett's decline, but he was quick to add that Brett was responsible for his own choices, and that I shouldn't feel guilt into getting involved. I appreciated Nick's honesty and the fact that someone in that family recognized I wasn't responsible for fixing Brett. Meanwhile, things with Matt were getting more serious. He'd been incredibly understanding about the whole situation, never pressuring me one way or another. We'd started talking about possibly moving in together when his lease ended. In a few months, the contrast between his calm support and the chaos of Brett's family wasn't lost on me. About 2 weeks after our coffee meeting, Susan escalated to showing up at my workplace. I was walking to my car after work when I spotted her waiting in the parking lot. My heart dropped. This was crossing a major line. She approached me with this frantic energy, clutching a folder that apparently contained Brett's resume and asking if I could put in a good word for him at my company. I was livid. I told her firmly that her behavior was inappropriate and that she needed to stop contacting me. Her face crumpled and she started crying right there in the parking lot, saying she didn't know what else to do, that Brett wasn't listening to her, that she was desperate to help her son. A few of my coworkers witnessed this uncomfortable scene, which was mortifying. I ended up guiding Susan to a bench away from the main entrance and telling her as calmly as I could that I couldn't help her or Brett, that our relationship was over and that she needed to respect my boundaries. She left eventually. For the rest of the week I got curious looks from coworkers who had seen the parking lot scene. Angela, who also works at my company, fielded questions from people wanting to know who the crying woman was. It was embarrassing and infuriating. Then Brett himself finally reached out. He sent a long text message apologizing for his mother's behavior and for how things had ended between us. He admitted he'd made a huge mistake listening to his mother instead of standing up for our relationship. He said he missed me every day and had been too ashamed to contact me directly after everything that happened. Reading his message, I felt nothing, no flutter of lingering feelings, no satisfaction at his regret, just tiredness and a vague sense of closure. I showed the message to Matt, who read it without comment. I decided not to respond to Brett right away. I needed time to think about what, if anything, I wanted to say, but Susan didn't give me that time. She called again the next morning asking if I'd received Brett's message and what I thought about it. When I told her I thought it was inappropriate for her to be involving herself in our communication. She got defensive and said she was just trying to help. That was when something in me snapped. I told Susan in a voice so calm it surprised even me that I was blocking her number after this call, that if she contacted me at work again I would report it as harassment, that Brett was an adult who needed to solve his own problems instead of sending his mother to fix them. Before hanging up I added one final thought, that perhaps if she'd raised her son to value people for their character rather than their social standing, he wouldn't be in this situation now. That evening I finally responded to Brett's text. I told him I forgave him for how things ended because holding on to anger wasn't helping either of us, but I also made it clear that we had no future together, that I had moved on and that he needed to do the same. I suggested he get professional help for his drinking and gambling, and that he needed to stop letting his mother fight his battles. I ended by wishing him well and asking him not to contact me again. I blocked both their numbers immediately after sending that message. It felt like closing a door that had been left ajar for too long. The next day though I got an Instagram DM from Susan. She'd created a new account just to message me. This time her tone was angry. She accused me of being heartless, of abandoning Brett when he needed me most. She said I was throwing away years of history out of pride. That last bit almost made me laugh. Susan talking about pride as if she hadn't destroyed our relationship with her own. I didn't respond, just blocked that account too, but she found other ways, emails from new addresses, even a handwritten letter mailed to my apartment. Each contact was more desperate than the last. The final straw came last weekend. Matt and I were having dinner at my apartment when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Brett standing there looking disheveled and clearly having had a few drinks. Susan was hovering anxiously behind him. I was so shocked I couldn't speak at first. Matt came up behind me asking who was at the door, and the look on Brett's face when he realized I had someone else there was almost pitiful. What followed was awkward and uncomfortable. Brett tried to talk about our past, about how much he regretted his choices. Susan kept interjecting with comments about how good we were together. I didn't invite them in. Instead I stepped into the hallway and closed the door partially behind me. I told Brett as gently but firmly as I could that this wasn't appropriate, that showing up unannounced at my home crossed a serious boundary, that I had meant what I said in my message about moving on. Brett's response surprised me. He turned to his mother and said this was exactly why he hadn't wanted to come, that he told her this would only make things worse. Then he apologized to me again, not for the breakup this time, but for not protecting me from his mother back then, and now I haven't heard from either of them in the 5 days since that encounter. Nick texted once to apologize again and let me know he was taking Brett to his first Gamblers Anonymous meeting. I thanked him but didn't ask for further updates. Matt and I are going away for a weekend trip soon. I've changed my email address and asked my manager to be on the lookout for unwanted visitors. Life goes on, and surprisingly it's better than I could have imagined a year ago when I was planning a wedding to the wrong person. I don't know if I'll need to post another update.